gonna start the stream. All right.
We're still waiting for some folks to trickle in, I believe. It's 6 o'clock now, and so we'll just give it a few moments for folks to join and log in through Zoom. We're here for the first community listening session from the Mayor's Pledge work group. And my name is Nicole Hendricks. I'll say that again in a moment, but we'll wait for folks to trickle in. Great. So I'm hopeful my colleagues here will monitor the participant list and wait for people to kind of join. It's just 6:01, and folks have to manage getting into the session. But I'm the facilitator for this evening's conversation. It's more of a listening session, so we're here to hear your experiences about policing in Easthampton. Thank you for joining us and for your interest and sharing your insights on public safety. It's important that we hear from many voices, the many voices that make up the Easthampton community. And we've scheduled 2 hours for this session. It's going to end no later than 8 p.m. Before I provide you with some context for today's session and review the agenda, I want to take a moment for some brief introductions. And the first thing I'd like to do is introduce Mayor Nicole LaChapelle, who's going to say a little bit about this work group.
Good evening. Thank you, Nicole. It's always wonderful to work with somebody with the same first name. It's one name I won't forget. And thank you for your work on this work group that really started with the pledge I took on June 3rd of 2020. It seems such a long time away from where we are now. I took the pledge to really make a serious commitment to reimagine policing as we've known it across our country, across our state, and in Easthampton. And one of the things I really value about the process that was put forth by the Obama Foundation and My Brother's Keeper is the process, especially this part right now, the community listening session, goes to the actual business of policing. So there are large, broad scope issues and reform efforts around policing in this big, huge balloon of what law enforcement looks like. But this work group, and what I asked the work group to do in reviewing the use of force policies of the Easthampton Police Department and seek community input and listening to the community, is to get beyond all of what is on paper and get to the culture of the community, how they relate to law enforcement and government in general, but also to the business of it, right? So I view myself as a mayor who is in the business of mayoring, and always love that feedback. And now we want to stretch that into use of force, and that's what the work groups might ask of them. It's my ask of the community to really share how they feel about policing, how they want to see policing in our community, so we can get to the best possible model of the business of policing in Easthampton for everybody. And also, I would just add that, this is not an imposition on any one community or any one person or group around what policing looks like in Easthampton, or what engagement with the police department means, how the police department engages with city residents and visitors, as well as city residents and visitors engaging with the police. It's not an imposition. We're really looking for some common ground here, common humanity of what people want to see, how they want to be treated on all sides of use of force policy, and that we go forward with that common understanding. To say that to this point, the mayor's pledge work group has been a series of hard conversations, difficult conversations, vulnerable conversations, really does not describe the work and the feelings and the strong directions that everyone in the work group holds. That people that were working, officers that were working with on the data that this group is working, they are, you know, they're beyond difficult. But when I wince when I hear those conversations, or even my replies to questions that are not really where they should be, I think about what we are not undoing, but what we're reimagining, a system that is and continues to be based on the involuntary, really oppression of Black and brown people who really weren't given the choice to come here, and how our country has succeeded, but also our city, and a hard conversation in the wincing has to be a part of it to unravel what we're feeling personally towards each other, but then how we can re-envision our city. And I'm a strong believer in that all world change happens on Main Street, and personal to who I am as mayor, all world change for the better starts on Main Street in Easthampton, Massachusetts. And that's really what I've asked this work group to do, is to take a look at those use of force policies and those related, work with an extremely capable and gracious, patient, compassionate facilitator as Nicole Hendricks, and all of her experience doing this work. Listen to you, the community, put forth a report of what reimagining police look like. And I'll end with this common ground, and this common convening includes everybody in the city. And that's hard for a lot of folks to hear. And I wholeheartedly also mean and include law enforcement officials and their families in the community. That there's not everybody has to have a place at the table. We need to work for people to feel comfortable enough to at least know that they come to the table, and take everybody for where they are. So Nicole, from one Nicole to another Nicole, thank you for doing this work. Thank you everybody on the call and live stream. I so appreciate it. I'm going to stick around and listen for a little bit, and then work on the fiscal year 22 budget. Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I really appreciate it, and appreciate your support of this work. As you mentioned, there are some really dedicated folks who are a part of this work. And so I want to just start by introducing the members of the work group, and they can just raise their hands. First, Rebecca Pasa, Margaret Kirstein, Omar Gomez, and Alice Wanamaker. Hi, Alice. It's great to have all of you here. The purpose of the community listening session, as the mayor mentioned, is to hear directly from community members. Chiefly, we want to hear about your experiences with public safety and the ways that you may interact with police. And at the end of today's session, what we learn about in terms of your experiences, what you love, what you need, and maybe what you would like to change will all be part of a report that we will submit to the mayor. This isn't to say that this work and the work of the Mayor's Pledge work group is going to solve all of the community concerns that people have or that they might raise this evening. this information, is just part of a much longer process that your community is engaging in. And ideally, when we pull together some sort of set of recommendations, this will inform efforts that are undertaken by, community leaders, local organizations, elected officials, and residents to build systems and responses that recognize the humanity and dignity of every person in your community. That's really the goal. And so we'll spend the majority of the session, tonight listening and talking about public safety. But first, just bear with me for 1 minute. I want to say a quick thing about Zoom and how this is going to work. So I have some folks working with me tonight, chiefly Omar, and he's going to monitor the chat. So if there are things that you would like to say that you don't feel comfortable saying out loud, and you want to write it, then you can do so in the chat function. If you're not completely familiar with Zoom, you'll notice that there's a participant button that tells you who's on this particular Zoom call. And if you click that, you're also able to use the raise your hand function for those of you who've not done this before. So that's sort of how we would like to call on folks is if you would like to make a comment, please use the raise your hand function, and then we will recognize you and you'll get to speak. We are hoping that one person, at a time for 3 minutes, but it looks like we don't have a huge list of folks here tonight. So if you get to speak for 3 minutes and then there's more time, we'll certainly be happy to hear from you and have further comment, take further comment. For folks who want to leave other comments, but maybe not in this particular session, I just want to draw your attention to the other ways that you can contribute. And if you're listening in and you're not part of this Zoom session, we would like you to know that you can access the city's website. And on that website, you'll see a link to a survey. It's a very, very short survey. And it just asks questions about your experiences with policing in the town, in the city. You can also email us directly, and that is mpwg@easthamptonmass.gov. So if there are additional things that you would like to say, please send us an email. We're really happy to hear from you. One more thing before we open up the floor to discussion. We have just a set of agreements that, as far as having these dialogues, we think makes sense. And that, just kind of, some of it may seem commonsensical to you, but we want to reiterate, this is a space where folks hopefully are sharing some experiences they may have had. It may not be your experience, but try to listen with compassion. You're under no obligation to speak. If you just want to join and listen in, that's perfectly fine. You hopefully are respectful of the opinions and experiences of others. And another thing that we thought would be important to say is it's helpful when gathering this kind of information for people to speak for themselves and not necessarily as a representative of an entire group. So these are just some things to keep in mind as you listen, and we will be doing this again next week, where our focus is going to be slightly different. Tonight, our attention is on policing right now in Easthampton. So these questions are a set of questions that we hope will guide your comments. And what we're hoping to hear are things related to: what does public safety mean to you? What kinds of interactions do you have with police, and how do those interactions feel? Are there any experiences you would like to share? And then the last one is, what is your community already doing well to support community safety? So those are the general guidelines. Omar, are we hearing any comments that people want to sort of make in the chat? If there are things that come up or you have a question about this process, please, you can also add those into the chat. So I'm going to stop right there. This is the time for you to sort of participate, join in, tell us sort of some of the things that you've been thinking and you know that you want to tell us about policing in Easthampton. And if you can't figure out how to raise your hand, you can also, because there's few of you, you can also just unmute yourself at this time if you want to. We're here to listen. If folks don't have anything off the top of their head right now to contribute to the discussion or want us, you know, something you want to speak about, I'm happy to cover a recent change, and maybe that will spark some feedback if people are not sort of ready to speak up. Recently, as part of the draft report, an initial assessment of the Easthampton Police Department, there was a recommendation about revising and looking at the mission statement. So the Easthampton Police Department took this recommendation and has actually changed their mission statement based on the recommendations of this group. So I would maybe begin with sharing this most recent change. And I'll provide a little bit of context in terms of where the recommendation came from. So you may not know what the previous mission statement was, but it was a little bit of an older kind of framework, and one that we would characterize as kind of more of a warrior mindset. So it really emphasized aggressive pursuit of law violators. And when we looked at the mission statement, we had a conversation about the difference between sort of a warrior mindset and a guardian mindset. And a lot of discussion around policing has focused on really trying to move community, you know, public safety towards a positionality of guardianship, you know, working with communities to solve problems. And so this is hot off the press. The revised mission statement of the Easthampton Police Department. And as you can see, they say here, the Easthampton Police Department is a dedicated and diverse group of professionals committed to working with the community to make the city of Easthampton a safe and desirable place to live, work, or visit. And I think it's important to sort of see that there are elements here that are a pretty big shift from what the old mission statement is. My question is, you know, are folks, is this consistent with what people in the Easthampton community would like to see as far as what will drive the focus of policing? Because ideally that's what mission statements are. They're really living, breathing sort of set of ideals and how people will choose to work. So I welcome any feedback. Okay, I see somebody has a hand raised. So that is Casey. Casey, go ahead.
Hello.
Hi,
I
Casey.
feel like I had to I'm like, oh no, nobody's saying anything. But I can really speak about my experience from, I think, many different levels, let's say, as a community member, because I own a business here in Easthampton. I served on the school committee for a term a few years ago. Sorry. I'm trying, the person that's in the house, I'm trying to tell him to be quiet. But anyway, and also as just a person and, as a parent, and I can speak to just even working with the chief of police, Alberti, when there were issues in the high school, when I was serving on the school committee, what I found is that there was, Chief Alberti's door was always open, and he was always available to speak to him from, the role of a school committee member, because we were trying to figure out what happened, what's the policy for the school resource officer, etc. And my experience with Chief Alberti was, he's very transparent and he had an open door. So he was approachable. And my experience as a business owner, when we first opened, our store was vandalized, sort of, when someone smeared feces, I think it was dog poo, on the front door with expletives. And they called us early on in the morning to say, hey, this is what happened. You might want to get down here and clean it up. So as in terms of like a, community member, we have your back, being helpful, they were there for us as well. And recently I got to do the mayor's toy fund, and working with the mayor, and the police were there to, help with traffic detail, but they also delivered toys to, like, the leftover toys to parents who couldn't come. And I think that, based on what the mission statement, that's what I've seen in practice. Mind you, my experience, I will say, as a person of privilege, as a white woman, that is my experience. So I haven't had other experiences with the Easthampton Police Department that look different. I also supported them when they did I think that they served a bunch of hamburgers in the summertime, where I think they have, I forget what they call it, but clearly we can't do it at this moment. But there is that community sense. And I think that it makes it really challenging at this moment, because we can't really be out and seeing each other and doing the same kinds of things. And I think that those things are really important, because, we do live here and we are community. So I think that's important, that the police in our community live in Easthampton. And so I will be finished here. Thank you for listening.
That's terrific. No, thank you for going first, Casey. And I'm really sorry to hear about that experience with your business. That's terrible, and I thank you for sharing that. I also want to acknowledge there are some comments in the chat from Desiree. Public safety is working together towards a better community. What problems have been identified in Easthampton specifically that we can work towards fixing? So these are, I think this is the big question for the community to try to hash out. The work of the Mayor's Pledge has really looked at very specific elements of policing, primarily use of force and use of force policies. We've also looked at other kinds of data, and we're in the middle of administering a community, a survey to community-based organizations to learn a little bit more about what people feel are some of the biggest priorities or challenges that they might face, and about the ways that they interface with the police. We also have a community survey for residents. It's very short, as I mentioned, and Omar has placed it in the chat. So if people are interested in, taking that, we would really appreciate it. But I think Desiree asks a really important question. What are the problems that have been identified? And my answer to that is, and I don't want to say too much because this is supposed to be a listening session, but the work of Easthampton, when we look at sort of crime statistics and crime data, that's just one dimension. And there, fortunately, in Easthampton, in terms of reported data, you don't experience really high levels of property and violent crime. And so I think it's really kind of zeroing in on which areas, the community can work together to problem solve. And some of those things that we've heard about are, responding to people in crisis. And also, I know the police have already engaged in working with local organizations around opioid and substance use disorder. And so those are some things that stand out, but I think part of what this session is meant to do is to hear about what people are facing. What are some of the bigger challenges that maybe don't show up in official crime statistics? Because that's not really all that public safety is. It's sort of goes beyond just the reported kinds of incidents that people call the police for. So we're here, we're open. We want to hear from you. Do we have it? Casey went first. She took the plunge. Anybody else who's currently joining us want to say a little something about their perspective on public safety in Easthampton? Yes, the questions. So Lindsay is asking, can I put the questions back up? Yes, I can. If I navigate through all this Zoom screen here. Okay, there we go. So what does public safety mean to you? And Desiree's question really had me thinking a lot about that. What are the different dimensions of safety? So aside from, what Casey has described, which was, responsiveness and interactions with the police through her business and through the school committee, there are other ways to think about, sort of public safety. Some of this is a exercise in sort of creative imagination. How do we think about what it means to be safe in a city or a town or a neighborhood or a place? Do we have any other folks that want to share a perspective? We have a question. So what type of anti-racism training do our police officers receive? So I'm not quite ready tonight to answer all of that. We are in the middle of writing this big report, but it is one of the questions that we're addressing in the work of this of this group. I will say that Easthampton police go through training that is provided by the state. So there already is state level training through the Municipal Police Training Council, and the MPTC, they set the standards as far as the kinds of training that police have to do yearly, and do what's called in-service training. I will also add that through my interviews with the police department, I've learned that they have also gone through a curriculum called Fair and Impartial Policing, which is a national curriculum developed to teach police officers about implicit bias. And so there are some officers who have been trained in that curriculum, and I believe they have not yet administered that training or conducted that training, but they have officers who have done the train the trainer. And so they do, according to the interviews that I've done, have plans to train other officers in that particular curriculum. I would add one other thing to that question, which is that with the recent legislation that was passed by the state, there will be additional training requirements that will be mandated by a new post commission. And that is, in development. So we'll have to wait and see what some of those, but the legislation is available, and you can kind of see what some of those proposals are in terms of the new state law. Thanks for that question, Jenny. Got me on the spot here. When we finally have a report to submit to the mayor, training will be a part of that report. Any other questions, comments? It seems to me, as we're just starting with this process, that folks do have a lot of questions. And so that's helpful to know that maybe there's more kind of sharing of information that needs to happen. I see some other folks here. Any other questions that people have? That this is your chance to raise them. David, okay, are there any concrete issues that have come up directly in Easthampton, or are we snowballing off social media and what is going on outside of Easthampton? That's an important question. It's not one for me to answer at this particular moment, because we're really hoping to use this as a listening session. But I take your comment, David, as a really important, this is a theme that we hear, and we're open to hearing and listening. What's the relationship between national calls for police reform and what's happening in local communities? And I'm not going to comment specifically right now about Easthampton, because it's I think looking to the work of this group and the report will answer some of those questions. It's not a surprise. There won't be any kind of big reveal, but we'll be talking about maybe some of the themes that you're hearing on a national level. And that has to do with, accountability, transparency. These are things that good governance and institutions and organizations that want to follow best practices are all kind of looking at and talking about. How can we be as accountable and transparent? How can we work together more closely with communities to solve problems that maybe don't require criminal legal system involvement? These are things that are, if you want to say issues, these are things that small towns, smaller municipalities also need to address. How much to, focus on a criminal legal system response versus maybe alternatives that do less harm. to the folks that are maybe suffering with or dealing with mental health challenges or substance use disorder. How can we divert some of those folks to resources that are going to, you know, support them and help them the most. So these are things that are on the table and part of what we're examining. It's a great question. And I sort of half answered it, even though I said I wouldn't. Any other comments or questions that folks have? I wonder if, you know, I know Casey kind of discussed this a little bit, but are there things that, to also connect that with David's question in the chat, are there things that the community is doing well that, you know, can be elevated? Or are there experiences that, you know, what are the ways that we can engage with the community to hear a diverse range of perspectives and experiences? Maybe that's one way that those of you who are joining us this evening can help us in our work. How can we kind of, oh, Lindsay, go ahead, Lindsay.
Hi, Nicole, thank you for hosting this. I guess, I mean, to share my experience with policing, the police in Easthampton, I haven't had any, I've only had positive interactions with police in Easthampton. Helpful, and as Casey had mentioned, Chief Alberti's door has always been open when I wanted to speak with him as a city councilor or just as a resident. I guess what frustrates me is when we try to talk about the institution of policing, that it doesn't seem to be a real opening for it, because it's just, there's immediately defensiveness about Easthampton police officers and how great they are, and it doesn't mean you're not part of a system that has repeated, you know, over the years inflicted violence on people of color. And maybe if that hasn't happened in Easthampton, one, we don't have that large of a population of color, not to say that it would have, but people still, whether or not they had a negative interaction with a police officer in Easthampton, there's still a fear of police officers, whether or not it's because of an interaction with a police officer in Easthampton. I've had several negative, misogynist, scary interactions with police living in New York City, which just made me kind of fearful of and off-put by police. And so it's taken time of interacting with police here to kind of, you know, just kind of change my feeling. But, and I am a white woman here, so, and there's not really representation from other people in our city that can share other perspectives. And I know we're not supposed to represent other people, although as a representative, I get emails from other people in our city who feel unsafe with our police for a variety of their own reasons. But I don't feel that they feel there's room for that conversation. And that's what concerns me, because there's got to be acknowledgement that it is a system that has harbored racism, has, you know, there's been police protection of other police who have committed domestic violence. And whether or not we're talking about individual Easthampton police, can we talk about the system in a safe way without being called anti-police, without extreme defensiveness? And I feel like just that lack of willingness to have a conversation makes people feel unsafe. And the signs around Easthampton, we support our local police, which included in our chief's yard. Specifically, I've gotten emails about those that makes people in our community feel like it's one side versus one side. And those signs make, someone wrote me an email, it makes them feel like he's chosen sides and they're clear on what side he's chosen. And so they don't feel safe in this community. And I just am really frustrated and heartbroken that I can't find a safe way to have that conversation in our community.
Thank you, Lindsay. I really appreciate your comments, especially as it relates to making distinctions about the institution of policing on a much larger scale and individual police officers. And that we have to be able to draw that distinction, that there are elements of a system that cause harm. And yet there are individual police officers who are helpful and friendly and accessible and approachable. And so how can we, as a community, interrogate or try to have deeper discussions about this system, and obviously sometimes about people who are public servants who betray the trust of their position. That does occur, and it occurs in small towns and smaller cities, and it occurs in other professions as well. So, how can we have these safe spaces? I really appreciate your comments. Desiree, go ahead and unmute. Thank you.
Hi. So I kind of want to go off of that. We had a sign in our front yard. I was actually terrified in a way to put it up there because I didn't want to be targeted for supporting the police department. But what is a way? Having a family member that's a police officer, that's a family. They're there. That's going to protect us. And exactly like you just mentioned, there are ones that are out there that are really great, and they're amazing people when you talk to them. But when you go to support them and you try and show the support for those individuals so that they don't leave the job, it's putting a bad sign out to the community. So what way can we support our police department and also support other members in our community without, putting a target on them or putting a target on us? And honestly, why does there have to be sides?
Thank you so much, Desiree. I think to just sort of tie those two things together, what you've said and what Lindsay has said, is that fundamentally, there is a common ground, and there should be a way to try to have these dialogues. And some of that means more regular interactions and an ability to be kind of vulnerable, and to listen, and to kind of what we're doing right now, hopefully. Aside from maybe, sporting events are great. And I think somebody mentioned that earlier, Casey, who I see you have your hand up. Those are great, but there has to be a space and a place to have this kind of listening and respecting folks' experiences. And, I'm not sure if that exists right now. And so maybe this is part of what we're learning from you, is how can we recommend ways to create those avenues for regular focused conversations about the actual work of policing and about safety, that is regular and intentional. Casey, go ahead.
Hi, I wanted to just say, I think it's important, at least in my own learning, to understand that we don't live in a binary. And I think that, it's how can you support Black lives, like Black Lives Matter movement, and police? I don't think that they are mutually exclusive. And I think that, even as you're talking about putting up a police sign, that you support the police, I support the police, and I also support the Black Lives Matter movement. And how can we come together so it's not so, there's not hatred, right? And understanding and hearing folks' experiences, because, if if someone doesn't feel safe, let's say, how can we pull them in and be heard? And what we also know is that, based on, I can't even, my experience is what it is, there is the door that's open, right, in Easthampton. And again, I think we need more community. We need more opportunities for us to get together. So we're all like, we see our common humanity. We see that we're human beings, and that there are folks that are afraid as well, and that the police are afraid as well. I mean, it's like, how do we lower the temperature of fear so we can we can be together? And I don't say kumbaya because I know that it's hard work, but it's not in a binary. I don't think it is. I think that you can support, or I'll speak from my experience. I can support the police, and I can support Black Lives Matter. I can support anti-racism work and still support the police. So I think that I don't know. I think there's opportunities to move forward, and it is hard work. It is vulnerable work, and it can't be done because it's vulnerable. And I'm a life coach, but I know that any kind of change or growth or learning requires folks to be vulnerable, but they have to feel safe in order to be vulnerable, to share or to talk, those kinds of things. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Casey. David, do you have a comment? Or was that a thumbs up, David? Might have been a thumbs up. Desiree, I also noticed you had your hand up again. Do you want to make another comment?
No, I was just agreeing with everything she was saying. I think she spoke way better than I did. So.
Yeah, so I think we're learning, I'm learning a lot right now, just hearing, especially this call for ways in which the Easthampton community or communities, because I think, one of the things is to acknowledge that it is a community, but there are many different communities that make up Easthampton, and they may really have different experiences and perspectives. And it's possible we're not hearing those right now tonight, especially from folks that maybe, more fearful or have had potentially negative experiences. This is a public live stream session. And so, we have to sort of acknowledge that we're hearing some really great dialogue, but it doesn't necessarily represent all of the voices. And so how do we move to a place where we can try to listen and hear about what neighbors might have experienced or are experiencing? It looks like Lindsay wants to follow up.
Yeah, thank you. I have an old Zoom version here. I don't know. I have to just be honest and say I personally struggle with this "We Support Police" signs because they came out as a reaction to the Black Lives Matter movement, and those signs do make a large part of our population feel unsafe, and I just feel like, and it makes people who are powerless feel unsafe, and it sends a message when you come into town. Like, I had a friend and a person of color, she came into town with 2 other people of color, saw the signs, and they did not feel safe in our town going to a swimming hole because they know that those signs are in reaction to Black Lives Matter signs. And my fantasy would be that the police could just stand up and join the Black Lives, say, yes, Black Lives Matter. It shouldn't be this or that. Why? I mean, I support our firefighters. I support our teachers. Do we need signs for everybody? Like, Black people were being killed. They are being killed. They've been killed since the beginning of our time. Their bodies are at risk. That is real fear. It is the powerless. And it's for the people with power to reach across to the people who are powerless. So it's hard for me to just put it in two camps when one camp has so much more power and the other group doesn't. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate your insight and sharing that anecdote as well. Thank you. Other feedback, comments, stories you'd like to share, ideas about safety. I will say that next week we will be doing this again. And we hope to really focus the conversation on visions for the future, and maybe this is a good starting point, you know, especially when it comes to, you know, places where we can have a dialogue. How can we, you know, what are the things that ideas about moving this particular conversation we're having tonight forward? It would be a shame if this just stopped here, right? So how can we take, maybe model some of this and think about ways that Easthampton as a community can start to engage in this dialogue, and really just listen like you're doing right now. It seems like not everybody has the same perspective, and yet we're listening and we're hearing from folks. We'd love to hear more. We'd love to hear from many more people. So, you know, if you know folks who are interested and want to participate, maybe not in this forum, but in other ways, please do your best to try to connect them with us and with this process. Desiree says, how can we get to a better space? How can we make people feel welcome, including those in our community that support our police, as a lot of them are also community members? Can there be a non-public forum? Sure. One of the things that we have offered is, you know, we invite people to contact us, and we're happy to have a non-public community listening session, or a sort of more of a focused listening session with groups of people, or even with individuals who have something to share. We really want to hear from folks in town, and so our virtual door is open. And Omar, thank you, has included the email address to the Mayor's Pledge work group. The more, you know, I think just to kind of reflect on, it's, people have shared, even though, you know, there's a small handful of us here, you've been very open and sharing your perspectives, and we really want to hear more. So I think if you are engaged and you know other people who are interested in engaging, we want this process to be as inclusive as it can be. Lindsay has said perhaps the police could more reaching out to marginalized communities in terms of community events and programming, seeking to meet people who are not the people who show up or walk through the open door. Desiree, how can I support my family without making others feel like I don't support them? These are such powerfully important questions. You know, I would just, I think Casey's comments are very interesting in saying that right now, even, you know, in this country and in many of our communities, there's a lot of sort of binary thinking that it's either or, and there are ways to support people and human beings, and, you know, that can cut across the kinds of positions that they hold. But at the same time, I just want to kind of underscore what some of the things that Lindsay also said. there is a real need to reckon with and acknowledge the history of systems, and policing is one of those. And that's not necessarily to, say that you don't support the police if you are talking about some of the harms that policing as a system can do to people. So how do we kind of have those deeper conversations? David said, I support police and equality. Is that possible? Indeed. Is that possible? It's an excellent question. I think these are all such really wonderful comments and contributions, and we're gonna take and soak in everything that folks are saying. Any other kind of comments? We're close to 7, and we said we'd hang for 2 hours. We're happy to do so. But we also, if we can sit in silence for a little bit if people have are ruminating on anything. My call to you is I'll just sort of say it again. This might be just our one of our group members said this is like our soft opening. If people were not fully aware of this event, there is going to be another session on Wednesday of next week, which is the 24th. So February 24th from 6 to 8 p.m. So, if people are watching and they're starting to think about some of these questions and they want to join in, we really want all of the input and insight that we can get. Will you Desiree, will you be providing any recommendations to the community and the public on your findings and how to make our city a better place? Absolutely. So as I said at the beginning, everything that we hear, all of the data that we're kind of looking at and examining, our conversations with the police and members of the police department, results of the surveys that we're conducting, that's all going to be part of a report submitted to the mayor. And we will have another public session to share those results. And I would just maybe put a plug. If there are other ways, it sounds like there's this real hunger and need for greater dialogue around these issues. So there might be a place for public comment about our recommendations. We want it to be as sort of interactive and useful as possible. It's not going to solve all the problems or issues in Easthampton, but we want to make useful recommendations, and those will only come, if we get as much input and insight as possible. So I see Casey. Go ahead, Casey.
So I'm going to be really vulnerable here and just say what's going on for me, because I think it could bring voice to others. So as I'm talking, I go back to the things that I said, right? And I know this is a public forum, and I'm like, how are people going to read what I said? Are they going to go and are they going to judge my comments? Not that it doesn't really matter in the bigger scheme of what we're here to do, but I'm just bringing voice to it because it's like the public forum. Even now, there's a bit of like, I don't feel safe maybe because did I say enough? And that's not gonna, I think it's not gonna help me or help anyone if I'm holding back as well. Or if I'm like, and again, it's not about me, but people may be thinking these things because they're not doing it right. And I say right in quotes. So this is how hard this work is. And I'm not saying it's like minuscule compared to people who are oppressed and people who are at, people like the people who have been dying at the hands of the police across the country, right? So that's not lost on me. But I think there's something really important for us to, it's like to drop down the defense or the walls. And I think I'm saying this as a white person, right? So I'm not speaking for anyone that's oppressed. And I think that that's where the work needs to come from, is folks that, you know, have not had any I don't know, issues that have impacted us negatively with the police, I will say. I just think coming together as a community to be able to see each other for the human that's in front of us, and that is hard work too. So, but I just wanted to give voice to that because I'm feeling like uncomfortable a little bit because of what I said or what I may not have said. And I know that those things can be interpreted, and that's also what we're dealing with right now, right? Somebody will post something on Facebook, could post something that, you know, I am whatever, it doesn't really matter, but that certainly would keep someone from speaking really openly and honestly. So I just want to bring that to mind too. You know, there is this need to jump on everybody in all spectrums, right? Like, and I think that the temperature is so high that those things are, you know, it's just really important, I think, for me to give voice to that. I'm not sure if anyone else experiences that, but I'm just speaking into what I'm experiencing.
Thank you, Casey. I will just make a little note as far as what you mentioned. For this purpose, for the purposes of our listening this evening, when we write this report, we won't be mentioning anybody by name. You know, we're going to be talking in aggregate about some of the themes that we're hearing, and so. But of course, this is a public event, and you've been sharing, you know, your perspectives. But I would just appreciate your point that it is very hard, often, you know, in social media to say anything, and so because people respond very quickly or in a way that is, you know, demeaning or violent or aggressive, and so, you know, how can we have more dialogue that is vulnerable, that is potentially scary? And I would say too that, you know, you mentioned as a white woman, as a white person, here you are, maybe that gives you a little more cover to even be here making these comments, right? So I appreciate you acknowledging your, you know, your position and how even with that you feel a sense of being vulnerable. Desiree.
Sorry to kind of echo Casey again, but I'm also in agreement with her. I mean, I am a white female, so I was hoping to gain some, I guess, knowledge from this kind of meeting, as well as anything that you set up in the future as to how to kind of, like I mentioned before, bridge the gap, make it, you know, where we're able to support our police, but at the same time not offend those that are coming into our community. I mean, I feel like the biggest thing I was taught always growing up was don't judge a book by its cover. So how do we get past that? You know, you see a sign that says I support the police, but that sign shouldn't mean that I don't support everybody else. It just means that we're trying to build, you know, a community where everybody feels welcome and everybody feels safe without offending anybody. And how do we get to that point? Because I feel, for me at least, I've been, you know, on, you know, pins and needles as to what I'm allowed to say and what I'm not allowed to say, as, you know, not being obviously a minority. How do I go about being able to support everybody without offending the other person, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Desiree. These are all really important questions, and will be part of, you know, what we sort of hash out in the coming weeks. I really thank everybody for their willingness to speak and to speak up and say what's in your heart and on your mind. Any other comments or thoughts?
Hi, Nicole. This is Jenny. I'm sorry if it's a little loud here. I have an infant in the background, but one thing I really struggle with, and I mean, this is very personal, but my grandfather was a police officer and, he struggled with mental illness and actually, was violent towards my grandmother. And, oftentimes, the police were called in that situation and kind of turned a blind eye. So I almost feel like one of the things I have a hard time with, but yet, like, I'm very empathetic because this is my family, is that, there's this culture where, you know, we allow certain behaviors because, the people who are our friends are, we're just turning a blind eye. And I don't know how to articulate this very well, but it's just, I don't know how to get beyond it because there's this like brotherhood or like a sisterhood. I know that police officers are obviously women too. And, I've been, having family in those roles. It's very challenging because I see that, you're, providing this wonderful service, but like people are complicated at the same time. And I don't know how to balance that. And I know on my own, like I've had to do like a lot of hard work, just thinking about, I'm like a white female too. And, I've had certain privileges and, I've had to do a lot of hard work and I continue to do that hard work. And, I know that there's certain biases that I have that I bring into situations, but I also know that, there's people in these positions of power and they need to be, very aware that they're in these positions.
Thank you, Jenny. I would just, maybe there's a way to kind of emphasize one of the key, it's not really an opinion, it's just sort of an observation when we talk about positions of power and maybe the difference between those signs that, end up in folks' yards is the one difference is that in policing, that's a profession and somebody has chosen that job. And police officers, unlike other public servants like teachers, are granted the authority to use deadly force. And that is a really important distinction. And that's part of the work of this group. And I think that anyone, when we get into these discussions, we have to at least acknowledge that. And that is that, people choose a job. They may not choose a racial or ethnic, they don't choose a racial or ethnic identity. And there's a difference there, right? So when you're working in public service and you're in a job and then you're also granted these awesome powers, awesome in that sense, to use force in the name of the state, that speaks to the power that Lindsay, I think, was describing. And that dynamic is one that is part of this work. And it's one that dynamic is, I think we have to sort of acknowledge that, right? That's what this is about. So there's the person, there's the profession, there's the larger system. And, in this case, police are in a very unique position in our communities. We grant them this authority. And so that's why, that's really why we're here tonight, is because that, Jenny, your conversation, your what you shared just shows us that, there are times when that authority is really can be misused. And so, I think we have to kind of acknowledge that. David, were you unmuted because you wanted to sort of chime in? Yes, no? Okay. Oh, any other kind of comments? It's just really learning so much listening to all of you. And I would just say, once again, we hope to hear more and in different ways. If we took a little quick demographic poll here, we would see that we're hearing a lot from white women. And so, I think that's notable. And we want to hear more from members of the community, who identify as Black, Brown, people of color. Um, you know, we want to hear from folks who are part of the LGBTQ community or communities. We really hope to have sort of inclusive input, and the public forum maybe isn't the way to hear all of those voices, but we want to try to provide other opportunities like the ones that I described. So thank you. Any other comments? Great. I just want to thank the members of the work group for listening in, and Easthampton Media, as well as the mayor for her opening remarks. And I will just end with this. Thank you so much for sharing your voices, for really speaking clearly about your experiences and the questions that you posed, which I think we will truly take to heart and take with us. And I hope that, you're able to, those of you who are listening in another format, if you feel compelled to participate and lend your voice to this work, we really are open to that. And I would add one other thing: if you have concerns about this very process itself, we're also open to hearing about that. That's something that we want to listen and understand more about if you have any concerns about this process. So please reach out. Thank you, and stay tuned. And if you would like to learn more, Omar has listed the website link in the chat, and we're sort of here, and feel free to contact us. We hope to hear from you. Thank you, and have a wonderful evening. Take good care. Thank you. Thank you all. Take good care.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.